I think we're live now. Hi, Américo. How are you?
Hello, good. Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone who's joining us. Thank you so much. Américo, we're so excited to have you. This is a very special live broadcast that we're doing because, as you know, we've been covering a lot of topics and going live, trying to bring Peru to everyone's home. But this is special because it really goes into the cultural roots of Peru and the language that is spoken by so many million Peruvians. And I'm really excited because you are an expert. You are teaching Quechua at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia in the US. And you have a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience. So let's start with some questions. um, so, Americo, tell me, where are you from in Peru? Where did you grow up, and what did you study?
So I am originally from Ica. For those of you who are familiar with Peru, it's in the south coast, probably 200 miles from south of Lima. I grew up there, and then I moved with my family to Lima, where I attended college. I went to school at San Marcos University, and then I did graduate studies in Florida. And well, now I live in Philadelphia.
And what made you want to study languages? Do you have family from the Andes who spoke Quechua, or what was the motive?
Yeah, so when I was at San Marcos University in Lima, I was very excited to major in literature. That was what I studied, and something that I really appreciated at that university was that the concept of literature was not just reading books, and that makes a whole difference because it allows us to recognize all the oral traditions that many people have in Peru, like not just indigenous groups, but many communities. And that
Right.
approach really liked me because it's like, yeah, I mean, just because there are not necessarily written words, that doesn't mean that there's not uh, like knowledge, and that knowledge is coming from different, we could call them knowledge keepers or elders who have the ability to keep that. And if we even think about Western culture, this is how classic literature like the Odyssey, like Homer, I mean,
Right.
most of people were not able to read until maybe until 500 years ago. So oral techniques were very important to and that's what called my attention about Quechua. I was able to start learning there. I also, I mean, just by being Peruvian, you are surrounded by many Quechua words and just traditions. But also, like my mother is from an area in the Amazon, which usually, I mean, for those of you who are not familiar with Quechua, but usually people associate Quechua with the Incas and therefore with the highlands. But Quechua is also spoken in the Amazon. Not there are other like 40 other languages in the Amazon, but Quechua is also spoken in the Amazon. So in near the area where my mother family is from, there are Quechua speaking communities. So the Spanish they speak is very like influenced by those words.
Right. Well, that's amazing. And so you began to learn how to speak Quechua in San Marcos, but then also studied the history, the culture of the language too.
Yes, I studied the language, and while I was at the university, then when I graduated, I continued the studies, and then I was lucky to spend time in Cusco, and I was living there, and by being there, you get a way more not just like language immersion, but cultural immersion. So that's why is even though I really like the background you are providing for this conversation, because as you mentioned at the beginning, now it's hard to travel, but it's important to keep that in mind, right? Now maybe now is an opportunity to learn more. So the next time we get a chance
Right.
to actually visit, we can look things with deeper eyes. In this case, Quechua, right? I mean, many
Yes.
people travel. I have students who tell me, "Wow, I mean, they learn Quechua or they know about Quechua after they visit Cusco, and they're like, wow, now it makes me want to go back to see it, with those other perspectives."
Right. Right, exactly. I mean, one thing is to learn Spanish. People think they need to learn Spanish to come to Peru, and yes, but also if you're traveling around the Andes and the Amazon, it'll be the majority of the people there speak Quechua, and so that's another language to keep in mind to really be able to communicate and immerse yourself, like you said, in the culture. So you went to Miami for your PhD. What was your dissertation about?
So I did a research on in how how is the cultural environment of the city of Cusco, which of course is heavily influenced by tourism and its connection with the history of the Incas, which is great because it
Mm-hmm.
gives a really uh, deep sense of pride for people from Cusco. And historically speaking, Cusco was always competing with Peru's capital, Lima. And Lima is because it's in the ocean and because of its history, like with a more Spanish population, it had other interests on how they would understand the country or their culture. So Cusco is still today a very important place to say, hey, the history of Peru. It also has deep roots in indigenous cultures, in the Incas. So I did research on that and how there are also contemporary initiatives, because in one hand, yes, it's great that we acknowledge the value of the Inca, but we could say a risk of only focusing on of that is to assume that indigenous cultures are frozen in the past, and like anything in life, nothing is frozen. So there are many initiatives of like young people who are using Quechua or traditional dances, but they are doing it in like fusion or using new platforms. So that's what I focused about, and see how this this youth is trying to reclaim their past and be so proud of it, but at the same time finding ways of don't be a stereotype into that, again,
Right.
timeless idea, and like take that forward, like the culture and the language.
Right. I mean, we shared today an article about three Peruvian women who sing in Quechua, including Renata, who is a rapper and pop icon, gone global, and she
Mhm.
raps in Quechua, which is truly amazing. And we'll get to a little bit more of your projects that you're working on. But tell us, what is it like teaching Quechua in the U.S.? You started the program at the University of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, since this page is about people who are interested in Peru, maybe most of them have heard about Quechua. Just in case, I want to share a few general facts about the language, and if you allow me, if I could share the screen, I will
Yeah.
share some just general data about the language. See, okay. Um, okay, so I will. Okay, so Quechua is an indigenous language, but is the most widely spoken indigenous languages in the
Do you want?
Americas.
I think we
Uh-huh.
can't see the presentation.
Oh, you cannot. Okay, let me see if I can do it again. Let me try.
Just go to the tab. Yeah.
Can you see it now?
Yes. Okay. Great. Thanks.
Perfect. So Quechua, yes, indigenous language, but if it has almost 10 million speakers across the Americas, not just in Peru, but in Bolivia, Ecuador, and some regions of Chile, Colombia, Argentina. And if you think about the amount of people who speak Quechua, is the similar amount of people that live in Greece. And again, one of the misconceptions we might have about Quechua is that yeah, I mean, maybe let's say if we had to put all the speakers of Quechua in one country, they could fit in Greece. Um, and not many people know about Quechua outside of like South America. However, I mean, people might know about Swedish or Danish, right? Maybe people who are listening to us don't speak Swedish or Danish, but they have heard about the language. So this is an interesting question to make, like why people, even though Quechua might have similar amount of speakers, actually it has more speakers. Quechua has more speakers than Danish and similar amount of speakers than as Swedish. People don't know about Quechua. So that's of course because there has been a history of, like, we would say, discrimination, and that's why it's an endangered language by UNESCO. But again, I mean, the same way as it's spoken in the Andes, there are migrant communities, mostly in the United States, in Spain, in Italy. So that's so these are general numbers about the language and where it's spoken. And considering that there are some migrant communities in the United States, I think that there's an increasing sense of reflecting that in how scholarship is being done. So at the University of Pennsylvania, there was a need to create this program, and I was very happy to work with them and not just teach the classes, but create a curricula and build up a program. And we started that 5 years ago. We have been able to offer classes, but also to invite speakers, and therefore to provide an environment where people can learn more about the language and again, just make it part of the environment. It's like I don't know, like I don't necessarily know Italian, but it's not it wouldn't surprise me to know that there's an Italian club at the university, right? But it's still not that common to do initiatives on Quechua. So that's pretty much what I work on like and on the program at Penn. We try to collaborate in different levels. For example, I'm going to show you a picture. I'm gonna share the screen again with some of my students who. Can you see the image? Is it possible to see it? Okay. Yeah. So for example, these are some of my students who they are from the United States. Their parents might be, or their grandparents might be Ecuadorian, Bolivian, or Peruvian, but they are also trying to challenge the idea of what does it mean to be an American. Like many generations. I mean, I have friends who they tell me, oh, my parents came from Italy or from Poland, like in the 60s. And back in the day, if you wanted to be quote unquote American, you had to give up who you are in order to join the new country. But I feel like now when we are more aware of diversity and cultural heritage, the new generations are actually trying to incorporate, not just like giving up, but actually saying, yes, I am from the US, I am US American, but at the same time, being a part of the United States means celebrating the heritage of my family, and that's what I'm bringing to the table in this conversation of identity. So we also have these kind of conversations at the university, and learning the language is a vehicle also to reclaim that heritage and to make it visible to everyone, not just to these students, but to the community as a whole.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, oh, and you were part of a UN initiative, correct?
Yeah, so we one of the things that we try to do is to, if at the university, is to try to have an impact in a local level, in a national level, and hopefully in a global level. In the sense that in a local level, we try to learn from local communities. The university is based in Philadelphia, so in Philadelphia there is not a big Quechua speaking community, but there are other indigenous languages spoken, like Nahuatl from Mexico, for example.
Mhm.
So we try to do events with them, and we try to raise awareness that those languages are spoken in the area as well. And in a national level, we try to promote events like national, like in the upper right picture in this slide, is from a national Quechua gathering that we organize every year. We co-organize it with other colleagues, and it's a national gathering of anyone. You don't have to be a Quechua student. You can just be a Quechua enthusiast, or somebody who would like to learn Quechua. And it's kind of like a gathering to celebrate the culture. So we get together, we dance. It's less academic. It's more like a community building gathering. So people from all over the U.S. come to this event. Like for in this picture, we had people. We did it in Philadelphia, but we had people coming from California, Oregon, Texas, Florida. So that was something that we are also working on. And most of them are US born, or they grew up in the US, so they don't longer see claiming that heritage as a contradiction to being part of the US American society. And in a global
Right.
level, we try to learn along with the students of the different UN initiatives that are happening across the globe. The UN has an office for indigenous issues, and we try to bring the students to the UN headquarters in New York, so they can learn about the work they do. They have a big conference, a forum each April. I mean, unfortunately, this April wasn't possible to make it, but for obvious reasons. But yeah, we take students there. Like in the upper left picture, we have some of the Penn students who went to the UN, and they learn about all the global policy issues that are discussed at UN with indigenous peoples, not just about indigenous peoples, but many indigenous leaders come from across the world, including Peru. And many of my students, they tell me, I always appreciated how the value of indigenous peoples, but I never picture that they were these kind of platforms, these diplomatic or these global platforms. I mean, and sometimes, again, maybe following up with this stereotype of timeless and indigenous, it's hard for us to picture that indigenous peoples are in all the spaces, including these global uh, forums. So yeah, that's kind
Right.
of the work we do. Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing because we hardly think about the global diaspora of there's Peruvians everywhere. We're a lot around the world, and those Peruvians take their culture with you, their language, and so there's Quechua speakers all over the world. And I kind of wanted to ask you we're going around, like the global, the local. What kind of initiatives do you see happening in Peru? Do you see there's more value and there's more interest in preserving and creating more spaces for Quechua speakers in the present and culturally and in education?
So that's a very good question. Following up with the article that you mentioned that it was shared on the page, we can see that there are new projects that are trying to incorporate Quechua and make it part of like the everyday conversation. And I think that comes from, I'm going to also show, again, my screen to share some data that if we think about Quechua, I mean, again, maybe the stereotype is really heavy to assume that is not, let's say, Quechua in Peru should be more visible. If we think that 1 out of every 10 Peruvians speak Quechua, so we should have more representation of the language. We have these pictures from, this is not from the last census, but it's from the 2010. But I like it because of the graphic, and it really shows us that there are millions of people speaking Quechua in Peru right now. And in the 2017, I don't know if I have this data here, but in the 2017 census, we also had even more people who don't necessarily speak the language, but they identify themselves with the language. And these creators, especially the youth, are very aware that they are not just using Quechua as a tool for art, but they are sending an awareness message. Like here, I have two different quotes of two contemporary Quechua singers. Renata Flores, which was mentioned in the article, right? That she acknowledges that Quechua is still perceived as a symptom of poverty. As unfortunately it might happen with Spanish in the United States, right? Some stereotypes, some
Right.
social stigma might be attached to that. Or the Liberato Cani, which is a hip hop Quechua artist, he says that Quechua for him is a way of resistance. Um, and these questions, I think, are happening everywhere. I want to extrapolate it to the US case because, for example, in the United States, for those of you who might not be familiar, there's a celebration called Hispanic Heritage Month. And many Hispanics, or many people who identify as Hispanics, they are now even trying to expand, don't necessarily deny the term Hispanic, but also say, hey, I also want to know more about my indigenous roots, my African roots. And that's like a phenomenon happening everywhere. This is the data I was talking about Peru, that in the 2017 census, if you can see it, almost a quarter of Peruvians identified as Quechua, even if they don't speak the language, but they are willing to, despite of all the tradition of discrimination, they are willing now to say, I want to celebrate this. I see it on the food I eat. Like if I eat pachamanca, which is a very traditional dish, that's a Quechua word. If now that quinoa is so popular, that's a Quechua word. And we shouldn't stop in just say, no, that's a word, but that's the end of people's work, people's knowledge. So yeah, I think it's great that these initiatives are giving a voice to that conversation that, as I think you can see, is happening everywhere.
Yeah. And going a little bit more into I lost you. Are you there?
I am here. For
Oh,
some reason, we got disconnected, but now I can hear you.
yeah. Hopefully, we're still live. Yeah. Okay. um, the kind of the representation of Quechua and indigenous cultures in Hollywood and in major movies, shows, that's been controversial because they don't do the research, they don't do the background checks of what these cultures are. And you were part of the research group of the Dora the Explorer movie. What was that like? How did you get involved, and how did it come out?
Yeah, so most of you probably have heard about Dora the Explorer, this bilingual Latina kid from Nickelodeon, a cartoon. So I was listening to a program in NPR, the public radio in the United States, and they were wondering who is the most popular Latino icon in the United States. And they come down to two names: J Lo,
Just
Jennifer
to,
Lopez, and Dora.
yeah.
And yeah, I mean, Dora is super famous, so it's not surprised that they at some point they wanted to make a live action movie with real actors, and pretty much the movie was made for people who grew up watching Dora in the early 2000s, and now they wanted to see a more grown up Dora, a teenager. Which is in this case a real actor, and this is it follows the dynamics of Dora being a very clever woman or a very clever girl who's exploring and figuring out things. So in for this plot, the Dora is looking for an Inca city, and then she is able to communicate with people using the local language, Quechua. It was really great to be contacted by Paramount Pictures, because not too many movies include indigenous languages, and very
Right.
few include Quechua. I was I'm not an specialist in film studies, so I don't know the exact amount of movies, but I was only able to think about maybe two movies, like mainstream movies. Of course, there's many independent films that include Quechua, but like Hollywood movies. And first, I was thinking on the movie The Secret of the Incas, which is with Charlton Heston and Ima Sumac, and it's from the 50s. That was the very
Yeah.
first movie, also with Paramount Pictures, that was made in Machu Picchu. And then we had this 2008 Indiana Jones movie that many people criticized because the movie basically said that while the main character was hanging out in Mexico, he learned Quechua. And unfortunately, that reinforces that stereotype that everything below the Rio Grande is the same,
It's
right?
the same.
That
Yeah.
for those of you who might, I mean, sometimes it happens, right? You say, oh, where are you from? Because let's say in the US, many people know more Mexico than Peru. And they say, oh, yeah, I mean, how far is from Mexico? No, it's really far, right? It's really far. So
Right.
it was a very good opportunity to talk about the language, I worked not only on the Quechua dialects, but also I was able to check the script before the shooting started to make sure that even though it was fictional, right? I mean, for those of you who know Dora, you know that Dora has a monkey, the monkey talks. Of course, that's not real, but I mean, we in its own fiction, the idea was that it should depict fairly the knowledge of
Right.
indigenous culture, and Dora again is the character of an explorer, a very clever girl. She has a chance in the movie not just to use Quechua, but also to share with the audience the different types of knowledge that even many, I would say, as a Peruvian who grew up in Peru, nobody told me in school about Inca constellations. I know what Capricornius is, right? I know like
Right.
the Greek constellations, but I don't know about Andean constellations. So I was really happy that the movie allowed to, of course, in a very quick and fast pace, because it's an action movie, but there are moments when the movie talks about that, or the movie talks about puquios, these kind of aqueducts that the Incas had. So it's very educational. I recommend everyone to, if they want to have a good time now that everyone is like home, so you can check that out.
Yeah, I mean that's great, especially because Dora is for children. It's supposed to be educational, so it's good that they even thought about really making it, like you said, it's a fair portrayal. It's not completely accurate or 100%, but it's great that they're acknowledging, and it's happening more and more. So I think we have a couple questions, but is there anything else you'd like to to share with us? Maybe upcoming projects that you have?
Well, we are happy that that there's. I mean, now there are becoming more opportunities for Quechua to be taught, like at Penn, for example, but which
Mhm.
also leads to more professional opportunities for the language, because at the end of the day,
Right.
the language has a value. Each language has a value, no matter how many people speak it. But we also need to work on ways to create opportunities so the language can be used. For example, speaking about development, we talk about artists, but how about knowledge? Like probably some people heard in the news that some people have been able to defend a PhD dissertation in Quechua, and that's something good because it's pushing the language, and it's not because the language is not capable, but think about how many words that we use now, 20 years ago, in English, let's say, or in Spanish, they had a total different meaning. Like I always put the example of the cloud. If I tell you that I send you something to the cloud, 20 years ago that would
Right.
make no sense, but now we know that it's, a virtual hard drive, right? So so now that yes, there were no PhDs, dissertations in Quechua, so the scholar probably had to come up with a new term or use a traditional word and give it a new meaning, and that's a challenge. And I'm really glad that these things are happening. And we are here at the University of Pennsylvania. We're also working to facilitate that conversation. For example, that's why we invite writers. We try to discuss about their work in Quechua. Last semester, we had a Quechua writer, Pablo Landeo, who is a Quechua professor in Paris, and he won Peru's National Literature Prize, writing a novel entirely in
Amazing.
Quechua without translation to Spanish. Or we had a Fulbright scholar from Apurímac, Peru, Nico Suarez Guerrero. So and we're going to have another scholar coming next academic year. So that's also important to consider. That for those of you who
Right.
are interested in Quechua, to see it as as an ancient language, but also a language that is alive and hopefully moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks to these initiatives, it's wonderful to see it spread out in so many areas of society. Okay, so we have a couple questions. Question number one: what is the possibility that Quechua will be taught in Peruvian public schools? And it is in some regions. Can you tell us a little bit?
Yeah, in the case of Peru, Quechua is already an official language since 1975. Of course, that didn't necessarily translate into concrete initiatives, but on paper, on the constitution, Quechua is a co-official language. Um, in rural areas, many people now can access to bilingual education, and in semi-urban areas, let's say small towns, small cities in the Andes, the students learn Quechua maybe 1 or 2 hours per week as part of their education. But that doesn't happen in, for example, the capital. Another question, therefore, we would need to have more clear public policies to incorporate the language. And again, as I said, I mean, Lima, for example, is the city with the most amount of Quechua speakers, almost 500,000. However, if you take the metro, the subway, or the bus system, you might get signs in English and Spanish, but not in Quechua, despite the fact that there are more Quechua speakers in Lima than in
Right.
any other city across the world. Another thing to think to consider about bilingual education is that the same way as in the United States, let's say migrant communities, for example, might have bilingual schools. Let's say if you go to to I don't know, could be a Latino neighborhood in the United States, or to an African speaking, French speaking community, you might have like French English schools or Spanish English schools in the US. And like in Lima, there are districts, for example, San Juan del Urigancho, that has thousands of Quechua speakers, and maybe we should have bilingual Quechua Spanish schools also there to challenge that stereotype that only people from rural areas speak the language.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that is an alarming situation where signage and it's not acknowledged in public space that Quechua
Mm-hmm.
is spoken. Number two, okay, some of your contact info or where we can follow you to know more about your initiatives. Um, can you give us a little bit about like your handles, your social media handles?
Oh yes. Well, you can reach out to me, and my username on the different platforms is Américo, like my name, but instead of a C, it's with a Q. So Américo with Q, and you can follow me, and I will always sharing interesting things or links or thing. For example, speaking about in music. I created a couple of years ago, but I'm surprised that people are still listening to it. I created a Quechua playlist in Spotify. If you put
Oh,
música
okay.
in Quechua, it's called Música en Quechua, and you can listen to music, and I made it thinking on my students. So I tried to combine it with like hip hop, trap, pop, but also huaynos, which is a traditional Andean music. So a little bit of everything. Yeah.
Amazing. We'll share that for sure. That's awesome. And question number three, do you know where Quechua is taught in schools or other universities, maybe in the US?
Yeah. So in the United States, Quechua is taught at Penn, at the University of Pennsylvania, at NYU, at Ohio State, at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, at Stanford University. Next semester, um, the University of Texas at Austin will start teaching Quechua, which these are great news, because the more visibility the language might have, it's also important. And now that you are, and I will take the opportunity of this question to say that many people, even in Peru or even Latin America, but also in the state, might have this question: what if I have no connection at all with Quechua? Why should I learn Quechua? And I would say that now it's an important time to become more aware on how intercultural is our society. So learning an indigenous language is an opportunity to learn more about a different culture, and therefore to become more intercultural. Um, Sometimes we emphasize the idea of being global, but at the same time, we should balance that with like the idea of being global. Like, yes, I mean, we might travel to big cities and have more like, you know, global exchanges, but I mean, if we think about other aspects that are still considered global, like climate change, preservation, healthy food, they also come from indigenous communities, and we need to start listening to them. So we could also be proactive on learning, in this case, Quechua or another indigenous language.
That is very, very true. Um, so a little bit more about how it was like to work in Hollywood with Quechua. Was it were you able to I guess there were no actors. Did you interact with actors? Were you able to kind of spread the Quechua the Quechua word?
Yeah, well, they were filming in Australia, so I wasn't able to go all the way there. But yes, during the shooting and considering the time change, I was contacted many times to double check on the pronunciation, or maybe if they wanted to modify something, because as you probably imagine, even if they have a script, uh, once they are shooting, they might consider to modify something. So they wanted to make sure that, oh, okay, how do you say this, or how could we say that, and so on and so. Yeah, and I'm glad that the main character, Isabella Merced Moner, the person who embodied Dora, she herself is Peruvian American, and I
Oh,
mean, Dora doesn't have an identity. She's, I mean, let's say the character Dora is a pan Latina. Like she doesn't have a specific. Many people told me, oh, I thought Dora was Mexican, but no, not really. She's like, they on purpose they made her ambiguous, so everybody could feel identify with her as a Latina. But
right.
Isabella Merced Moner, she is Peruvian American, and she has spoken about what it meant for her is learning the language. And in an interview, she even said that she was able to talk with one of her aunts about this. So that was something very positive, I think.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Another question: how do you envision an utopian Peruvian urban city in which both Quechua and Spanish coexist with respect and harmony?
Wow. Well, thank you very much for that question. I think
Yeah.
we should see it less as a utopia and more as a reality for so many spaces. We can think of so many societies in Africa, in Asia, in Europe. Maybe we're more familiar with Europe, but it's so normal in Europe to speak 3, 4 languages. In India, it's not like I mean, sometimes maybe we have bought into the idea of a monolingual society. That is not an issue that only happens in Peru. It also happens in other countries. Even in some areas, right? Speaking another language might be a target of suspiciousness. So I think we should. The first idea just would be to maybe the utopia should just be a reality to see bilingualism as something positive. I mean, if we look at the research, being bilingual is better even for Alzheimer. It stimulates kids. So it has already, I mean, it's just great because of the intercultural approach, but it also gives you very concrete, quote unquote, benefits. So
Right.
I think maybe if, let's say, I work on languages, so the cultural part would be enough. But let's say for people who are not convinced, we could emphasize the other benefits of bilingual societies.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, a reality acknowledging, for example, we acknowledge that there's foreigners in Lima, there's people
Mm-hmm.
speaking English here, and we obviously want to make it easy for them to travel around the city, but equally the same, there are Quechua speakers, and that needs to be acknowledged for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
Yeah, and I see that there's a comment in Quechua, Iyanchu, Viracocha, Mendoza, Yusul, Paikizunki,
oh great,
Ayinta, Kashan,
yeah,
Ayanchu, Jorge, Añay, Kusija, Kayani, Kaipiru, Nasimita, Rimani, Noka, Ama, Penjacunichu, Cancunapa, Hama, Penjacuichu. Like, please don't be shy. For those of you who know some words in Quechua, for those of you who might not be able to speak the language fluently, it's even good just to think about words that might connect us to our heritage, right? Or again, even if we don't have a connection, right? If we love quinoa, okay, next time you eat quinoa, you can think about, right, the use of the language, right?
yeah. Can you translate that for us?
Yeah, so it's like, hello, Mr. Mendoza, thank you. You're good, right? Doing good.
Oh, amazing. I have to be honest, I took Quechua class for one semester at La Católica here in Lima a long time
Mhm.
ago. But I'm not really good with languages. I only had it for one semester, but it was awesome to really just even be able to understand a few words. Like that's a possibility, like either in the US or here in Lima. Do you know of other cities in Lima that teach Quechua?
Yes, well, there are now that everything is online, there are many institutes, like for example, the Cusca, Kuska, Cusca Institute, that they teach Quechua. The same, La Católica, Catholic University is very good. They both have really good programs. Also, for those of you who are travelers, Lonely Planet has a Quechua phrase book made by a colleague, Professor Serafín Coronel Molina from Indiana University. He wrote that phrase book, and I have friends who have told me that even if they can throw one word, like ayiyancho, which is hello, people know that you are making a great effort, so the attitude is different. I mean, people in Peru in general, they're nice, but let's say if they say, wow, this person is really making an extra effort, that wow.
Yeah, I think we really all should brush up on and learn a little bit before we travel around Peru again, for sure. So I'm so happy that we received these messages in Quechua from we're streaming on YouTube too. So thank you so much, Americo, for this wonderful chat. We learned a lot, and we'll definitely share the playlist and your contact info for anyone else who wants to learn more about your initiatives and what's happening with Quechua worldwide.
Yeah, thank you, Susana, and thank you for everyone for their interest. And again, I invite you to learn more about Quechua, to explore, to be curious. Now is I know there are many challenges also, right? But if you have the time, uh, be open to explore and Quechua and learn about, right. I mean, if you are, for example, in places like Canada or the United States, also it could be an opportunity to think about. I always ask my students this question: which are the indigenous peoples of your state? For example, in Pennsylvania, the Lenni Lenape people, for example. And this is a question that many of my students, they're very smart, but they are not able to answer, and it's not their fault. It's an opportunity to question how we need to actively complement our education, because for many
Right.
years, for so long, we didn't learn that. The same way as we Peruvians, we didn't learn our own constellations, right? Our own star constellations, the same way. So I leave you with that message, right? That it could be Quechua, but it could also be other indigenous languages and cultures that are around you, and that's a great time to learn more.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Americo.
Thank you, Susana.
And thank
Anyay.
you everyone for joining us. Bye.
Thank you.